power of stories. Now, you might be wondering, why are we talking about this today? We are going to talk about why we tell our stories and how we can use those stories to move people to action. Storytelling and leadership is how we can inspire action, how we can convey our values, and how we can simply connect with each other. We are going to talk about how the practical steps of storytelling and how to develop our own stories. And I also have a resource to share with you about Story of Self, which, if you've been organizing for any point in time, you have for sure seen Story of Self. So, why do we tell stories? Let's start with emotional connection. Stories evoke emotions, making the audience more likely to remember and resonate with the message. A campaign example. So think about stories that have moved you to action. You might have been watching some TV yesterday that might have moved you to action. Recent history that has been used is the 2004 Obama campaign, which kind of launched him into the national spotlight. And he was able to connect with voters, he was able to connect with donors, and he was able to use his story to connect and share his message. So, stories are fundamental to the way we connect, sharing our experiences and building on those relationships. Much of this work is from a fella named Marshall Gantz, who has been pivotal in shaping this work and understanding public narrative. So you might see some examples that he has used. He was a fancy pants Harvard fellow, but I like to, use digestible, not the big thick book that he has. So why do we want to harness the power of stories? As I mentioned, stories move people to action. We have relatability. Stories allow us to relate to one another on a much deeper level. We are able to convey values. We are able to share our core values and beliefs in a more compelling and simple statements. Memorability. A well-crafted story sticks in the mind, making the message more likely to be shared and then passed on. We are also able to add a call to action. Effective stories not only inspire others, but it also motivates you to take action. You share a story and you want to get to work right away. And it allows the audience to move from the thought process to the action very quickly and efficiently. And they're also more likely to create a ripple effect because they will stick in their minds. So then they will turn around and tell the story as well, and then move other people to action, therefore expanding our snowflake models. With storytelling, they help us feel emotions that remind us of our personal values because we've connected. We are sharing values. So if we look to our stories, they reinforce why we do what we do. Even if when faced with difficult situations, injustices, boundaries, all encompassing sadness of the world at times, we are able to have our why and reflect on it. So our stories remind us of the values. They motivate us to persevere, especially during these challenging times. We always want to go back to the why because it self-motivates people. So try to think of a time, and you don't have to share it, you can write it down. Try to think of a time when a story has motivated you to continue despite difficulties. And try to pull out some of the factors that you were able to pull from those stories? Was it the way they spoke? Was it their platform? Was it their background? So, what motivated you? And keep a note of these because when you are crafting your story, you want to pull out those factors that you connected with. So now we can talk about the structure. So now that we have, a note of those stories that have moved us, we can talk about the importance of structure. If you go up and tell a story to a crowd that is very meandery and it doesn't have focus, and it's just, you're going with the vibe, it is not going to get you the results that you want. So you want to have it with structure. So the structure to a good story is challenge, choice, moral outcome. So I have a challenge. All right, my challenge is I am looking for volunteers to get some community gardens. So that is the challenge. But you don't want to address that challenge in that way. You want to address the challenge of we have a lack of fresh food. The choice is get involved, come plant this here garden. And the moral outcome would be we all can have fresh food. So that is a very brief example, but the structure is what is the problem? What choice can you make? And how can we arrive at a solution? Our authentic stories not only build trust, but they don't feel fabricated, they don't feel exaggerated, they are simply coming from you. And we can all feel when stories aren't authentic. You can tell if people are faking it, you can tell if this is not their story. Like, we get those feelings because we either know their background or we can sense that, oh, they were never in that situation. Come on. Like, let's be real. Um, and we are able to get that context. So we want to make them authentic. And the cultural relevance is what gives you the ability to be with the times, but also find another way to connect because it resonates more deeply. So then, if we look at it, we have impactful messaging, and this is how we align with goals. Storytelling should be purposeful, and we should always align to the overall goal that we're getting at. If you're going to tell me a story about how you don't have transportation for school, but then you're asking me to um, have an immigration event, these two are not connected. You want to make sure your stories are connected. So we always want to align with the goals. The core message of the story should be to educate, persuade, or inspire. We don't want to tell stories just for funsies. We can do that when we are connecting one-on-one. We can do that at different times. But when we are telling our story to a group of people, we want it to have a purpose and a core message. So then we are able to move into public narrative. And this is where story of self comes in because there are three parts to public narrative. The story of self, so me, the story of us, here is us, and the story of now. With those three parts to public narrative, we are able to move mountains. We are able to create a shared vision and move people around a common goal. So we are able to mobilize to collective action. And with stories, we want to take a journey. We want to paint the desired future that you, as the audience, can help achieve. Because if I tell you a story that's not connected, and then I tell you, yes, you can join us to achieve this goal, it is not going to be able to connect. But if I take you on a journey and I say, hey, it is specific, it is centered around you, us, and together we can take action now. You are able to move from being the people hearing the story to being part of the story. So I'm pulling you into the journey. And also, besties, let's hang out. So we want flexibility and adaptation. Our stories can be adapted, different contexts, different asks, different core messages, because our stories are not, you're not limited to one story. The person that you are now has so many stories to tell. And when you are trying to get engagement, you simply have to select the right one. So you're able to adjust the tone, the details, the delivery method, all based on the audience, the platform. How you tell a story for a newsletter or print campaign is going to be different than how you tell a story in front of a group of volunteers. So you are able to adjust all of these items. So some examples on how to adjust to different situations. If you help the community recover after a natural disaster. For donors, you're going to emphasize how their contributions helped, how their money was able to provide immediate relief. For community members, different tone, different audience, we're going to focus on personal stories of resilience. These members from the community, let's show their strength. Let's talk about unity. Let's talk about the recovery process. If you're telling the same story to the media, we're going to talk about the broader narrative. We're going to talk about statistics. We're going to talk about the impact of the disaster. And we're going to talk about why the organization is involved now and how it's going to be involved in the future. So same story, same situation, different tone, different parts of the story, different deliveries, because it is all adjusting to your audience. So we always want to know who our audience is. It allows us to be way more powerful. So we also consider data and story integration because we want to enhance credibility. The integration of data is important because we are able to combine data with storytelling to maintain engagement. So we are able to use statistics and facts to support our narrative. So let's go back to the same disaster. If we don't have the numbers and the data as to how many people were affected, how many people were involved, how much money we raised, it doesn't make our story as strong as if we have those numbers. So we always want to use facts to support the narrative where appropriate. If we start talking about how much money we raised to the community members, to the volunteers, it's not going to be the same. If we talk about how much money we raised to the donors and how much money we still have to raise, it is going to hit a lot different. So we want to track these efforts. We want to track these, statistics. We want to track the efforts. So for example, if we are tracking our efforts of how many stories we are telling the community, or if we are tracking how many members of the community have told us stories, it makes it more engaging. So, for example, if the same member of your community is the only one involved, it makes sense to track how many times they've told their story, as well as it makes sense to then be able to move them into training or leadership so they can train others. So it is all about engagement. We also want to foster relationships. We want to have emphasize the storytelling roles to maintain this long-term engagement. Stories can help foster ongoing relationships to keep the audience engaged, and they continue to connect us. So if we continue to connect stories to the audience, it can continue to take them in the journey with you because they have become part of it. So if we go back to the disaster relief, and there are members of the audience that you told the story to that were impacted, you are then able to engage with them to tell their story. So it is the story of how we were engaged during this disaster, to here is someone that was affected by it, to let's work together, look how I did this. And it allows for that connection. And as I mentioned, it really helps with leadership development. So you're able to up your leadership development. Because if we think about the things that make someone a leader, it is not about title, it is not about power, responsibility. It is having a purpose and being engaged. So we want to ask ourselves, how are we defining leadership? And does the leadership require a title of power? And then we also have to consider, what titles can we give volunteers? Because oftentimes volunteers love titles. Like if you give a volunteer the title of lead volunteer, they are gonna like be more motivated because they are feeling appreciated. But that is not part of our story training today. It just allows us to use that information. We are able to, with leadership, we're able to talk about responsibility, giving people purpose in times of uncertainty. We're able to motivate because then we are able to consider if we follow our leaders because they're in charge or because they motivate you to follow them. Because as we all know, true leadership is about responsibility and the ability to inspire. It's not about who holds the highest title. It is, who are you going to follow that makes you feel nice inside? With stories, we can also always use it to overcome opposition. The ability to overcome resistance by showing examples of favorable outcomes and examples, it helps move to action faster. So some tips I want you to consider. We want to acknowledge the objection. We don't want to ignore it. We want to acknowledge it openly because it shows that you understand and respect the other person's perspective. Then we want to share a relatable story. So we are able to use stories that mirror the concern and the objections being raised. We want to highlight the positive outcomes. So we want to focus on the success of the outcome of the mirror story, emphasize how the initial concerns were addressed and or became irrelevant. And this also allows us to demonstrate empathy. We are listening. We are connecting. We are sharing our experiences. And this not only helps mitigate the objection, but also build the connection with this person that might not have been engaged before. Then we go back to data. We want to provide evidence. So, oh, you say that you see these fake news all over Facebook? Well, if we look at data, if we look at facts, these are the facts. Not in an accusatory way, of course. We want to, do these things with kindness. And we always want to end with a call to action. So we are overcoming the objections, but we still want to have a call to action. We want to encourage the audience to take a positive step forward. We have addressed their concerns directly, and now we're calling on them to become part of the solution. So some takeaways today. Work on your story. I'm going to share a story of self in a second. These narratives are going to help you connect with others. They're going to help you build community and inspire people to action. Some stories you should have advanced level. So these are the ones that you should work on. Origin story, where you came from, what motivates you. Overcoming adversity. You want to show resilience and the ability to overcome challenges. A success story. Showcase a major achievement and what you did to get there. A story of your values. What are your core values and beliefs? A failure story. What happened? It shows humility and the lessons learned from that mistake and or setback. Not everything we encounter is going to be a success. Sharing a story of failure shows resilience. We want to share our vision. What are you doing to inspire others for the future? Connection, how we're establishing personal connection with each other. A customer or client story, the impact of your work on others. This might be very beneficial when service-based organizations are providing services. A teamwork story. Look how we collaborate together. Look all we did. We are fantastic. Collaborate with us. And a story of change. We are addressing fears of resistance. We are able to demonstrate the benefits. So, before this is just a thank you. Future trainings, active listening, deeper conversations, initiative versus leadership, SEO, organizing versus mobilizing. And of course, we'll be sharing all of those on our newsletter and website. But I have a resource I wanted to share with you all. So when we are developing our story of self, what part of our life experience you want to draw on? And talks about the purpose of story of self, on why you're being called to leadership, why you're being called to involvement. So your goal is to help the listener understand and gain inspiration. So I have a couple of places to add your values, the challenge, the choice you made, and what was the outcome. So a quick example would be values, empowerment, fairness, justice. Challenge, everybody's terrible. The choice, I decided to get involved. And the outcome, everybody's a little less terrible now. Because justice. This is a lot of info. It is very heavy, and it seems like a lot, but we do storytelling in the work that we do every day. I just want us to have all the tools that you need to be able to do it right. This is a lot of info. It is very heavy, and it seems like a lot, but we do storytelling in the work that we do every day. I just want us to have all the tools that you need to be able to do it right.